Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service, and you're watching Alaska Weather. Thanks for joining us on this 4th of September. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date for your local community safety and your families, of course. You can do that easily by calling the Alaska Weather Information Line. That's 1-800-472-0391, a free service for you around Alaska from the National Weather Service. Now, as always, we can find our forecast information online at weather.gov/Alaska on your phone or mobile device, mobile.weather.gov. Bookmark that page, type in your village there, and share that bookmark to your home screen, and you'll have a very slick, quick, and easy way to get weather information in low bandwidth situations, or if you're just looking for something to load very fast, that's lean, mean, and a weather machine, that's a great way to do it. If you can't find what you're looking for, if you're looking for tsunami warning information, if you're looking for the Alaska Pacific River Forecast Center river flow information, or perhaps you're concerned about upcoming flooding or perhaps river drainage information, you can check that very easily by going to weather.gov/APRFC. If you can't find it, let me know. david.snyder@noaa.gov is an easy way to get a little bit of help from your trusty Alaska Weather Service friend. Here is a look at hazardous weather across the region tonight. Not a whole lot going on as far as watches, warnings, or advisories go, but we are watching for more fog to form across parts of southeastern Alaska. So I would keep your eye on what the folks down at the Weather Forecast Office in Juneau have to say this evening. It looks like there is potential for fog to form in some of the same places we've seen the last couple nights, all the way from Gustavus to Petersburg, probably up toward Yakutat and through Cross Sound and the outer coast there. Areas that are pretty susceptible to fog may see that return again, and it could be dense, so be prepared for that. If that caused you problems the last couple nights and early in the morning, it may be back again later tonight and into tomorrow. So just something to watch for there. And again, Weather Forecast Office in Juneau, weather.gov/Juneau, or at NWS Juneau on Twitter or on Facebook. We'll get you to that information very quickly. As far as fire danger goes, we're still watching for dry conditions and kind of on that edge of very high to extreme fire danger around western parts of the Kenai and certainly around the Anchorage Bowl area there. As you drive around any of the fire stations, you will see Smokey the Bear pointing at extreme fire danger and very dry conditions there. So we're still in that dangerous situation there, even though it has been cloudy and damp and moist and a little rainy in some places. The Kenai Peninsula certainly picked up more than folks in Anchorage and the Susitna and Matanuska valleys have, and by far more rain than what we've seen in the Copper River Valley. Those areas remain very dry. I have not seen the nearly amount of precipitation we've seen around the Kenai Peninsula or around the Anchorage region. We're also seeing drier areas up here around the Kotzebue Sound region. The good news is, though, more rain is on the way, and we don't expect that to be a long-term trend. But for now, as we are going into the first week of September, we are still looking at high to even extreme fire danger around parts of south central Alaska. Pretty crazy stuff. As we look at the satellite picture, you can see a healthy gale here around the Bering Strait region, just north of St. Lawrence Island and south and west of Kotzebue, west of Nome. This is going to probably bring up the winds enough to gale strength as we get into the overnight hours there, maybe a brief amount of time there, but it kind of surges and flows, and we'll likely see that spinning in that same old spot as we look at it again tomorrow. Not expected to move a whole lot. In the meantime, high pressure sitting across the Gulf, and that is the reason you're seeing the breaks in the clouds there. It's downward pressure, the downward movement of the air, creating what we call subsidence. As that air is subsiding, it is drying and limiting the amount of cloud cover, and you can see its effects here on the visible satellite picture. And in between that, of course, wide areas of low pressure, some of that across the Aleutian Chain, some of that across the southern Gulf, and just general instability across parts of western British Columbia and into south and western parts of Alaska. Watch the flow one more time here, and you'll see southeast is generally clear. South and western Alaska is generally cloudy, and that is all because of that moisture coming off the Pacific, making its way into southwestern Alaska and wrapping into that area of low pressure around the Bering Strait. Now, the North Slope has high pressure well to the north, and a low is kind of snaking its way across the North Slope. Clouds are forming along that boundary. Not very substantial, but it's enough to limit ceilings and visibility if you're trying to fly there. And that boundary's kind of been moving north and south, very close to the coast, as it usually does this time of the year. We have seen some pretty low decks there around Utqiagvik earlier today, and at times around Kaktovik. We'll continue to see areas of fog, rain, and poor visibility all the way across the Bering. And we've got fog out around Adak, Atka, and Shemya this afternoon. And another one of those waves is working its way across the southern Bering and close to St. Paul and St. George this afternoon. Here's another look at that loop, and you can see another burst of moisture is trying to work its way northward. You'll see on the maps here in a minute a warm front trying to lift north and west. It's going to be very slow when it does that. The main features we'll be watching will be out here across western Alaska. So here we go. Today's weather shows that low up around the Bering Strait at 994 millibars. A very stationary boundary here across the Chukchi. Some pockets of rainfall around Norton Sound down toward the Yukon and Kuskokwim deltas, and also around the Alaska Range and just on the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range generally to the west. High pressure sitting across the Gulf at 1,009 millibars. We've got some clouds there and certainly have had some fog in the morning. That should repeat again tomorrow. And low pressure sitting across the southern Bering at 998 millibars. This is going to reinforce itself over the next couple days. You'll see kind of this system of progression across the western parts of Alaska, growing, strengthening, falling apart, and kind of doing the same old thing. So watch as this low moves northward just a little bit more tonight. Warm and winter is trying to move into the Gulf, but this entire region across southeast and most of south central's Gulf Coast will be looking at generally quiet weather, light winds, and maybe poor visibility in the morning. Fog, especially for parts of southeast. As you look off to the west, low pressure creeps in a little bit to the central Aleutians, all around that broad area of showers and unsettled weather, but really the core of the winds is going to be right here across western parts of Alaska. And when we get to our aviation forecast in a minute, you'll see that fast moving wind that's upwards of 30, maybe 40 knots or so will be creating broad areas of considerable moderate turbulence there. So aviators want to keep that in mind. Not a whole lot of marine warnings with this as it looks right now. We may have a few places that are at least small craft advisory and maybe, like I said, maybe some brief gales up here around the Bering Strait. Most other areas are pretty quiet around Alaska tonight and tomorrow. But you can see as we have our black lines drawn on the map, these are isobars, lines of constant pressure as we always say, high pressure sitting across Prince William Sound and low pressures here across the southern Bering and around the Chukchi Sea. This is creating a wonderful conveyor belt for moisture and warmth to spread up the west coast and making it windy for sure, but it's also allowing pockets of rain, poor visibility, and plenty of cloud cover to sit right in the same old places across western Alaska. So you remember we were talking about the fire danger up here. Not a great threat right now. I'm sure things can burn just about any time around Alaska, but it does look like it's going to be wet, rainy, moist, cloudy, and cool because of the weather pattern that we see as we go into Thursday. High pressure sitting across eastern Alaska. There may be some showers embedded in that crossing over the Alcan border, maybe up toward Old Crow. A lot of that is not going to make it into southeast. You will see some fog in the morning. That will likely clear off as you get into the afternoon. As we get into Friday, that weather system kind of recovers and rebuilds itself, drops to 997 millibars in the north, just south of the Alaska Peninsula. A stronger area of low pressure is going to start to take over. This is dying, this is strengthening, and we're going to see a stronger southerly wind. It's going to have a better chance for some heavier rain moving into Bristol Bay. The wind should strengthen, and as we get into Friday and Saturday, the winds are probably really going to come up here across western Alaska. Maybe not to a warning level, but certainly something that'll get your attention with a steady south wind going across Bristol Bay, the YK Delta, and certainly into the Alaska Peninsula. All the while, high pressure doesn't move, and that's one of the reasons the winds are going to come up here. We're going to have to really do something to make this low pressure system move, so it's going to bring the winds in first. North of that, plenty of clear, dry sky, fog in the morning at least, and probably some light rain or drizzle around central and southern parts of southeast, and another weather system well behind that, working into the western Aleutians by Friday night. Here's a look at your temperatures by Thursday morning. 40s and 50s in southeast. South central, you're looking at mid-40s. A little bit of a cool night coming our way. 45 around Fort Yukon, lower to mid-40s for the North Slope, fairly mild there. 47 in Nome, 50 in Kotzebue, and upper 40s and lower 50s from southwest into Bristol Bay. 50 in Kodiak, 51 in St. Paul, and just shy of 50 for Adak and Atka. For the middle Tanana Valley, 67 in Fairbanks for Thursday. Lower to mid-60s for southeast, 62 in Kodiak. The North Slope, you're looking at temps once again in the 50s and 60s. Shishmara, 55. St. Lawrence Island in the lower 50s. The Yukon Kuskokwim Delta in the upper 50s to lower 60s there. McGrath in the around 58 degrees, 62 around Port Hayden. Overnight lows Friday morning, cool, 30s and 40s in the east, 40s and 50s in the west. Southeast, you're looking at temps closer to 50 degrees. And Friday looks like a very mild day in the interior with a high of 64 in Fort Yukon.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
And on to your aviation forecast. Now, IFR conditions are going to stay fairly thick out across the Bering and the Aleutians up into the Alaska Peninsula. Watch for areas of IFR to push into Prince William Sound, the Kenai Fjord, Shelikof Strait, Kodiak Island, and just south of Lake Iliamna into Bristol Bay, and also across the southern outer coast of southeast. While most of the inside passage is looking at least MVFR, IFR is expected just north of Sitka all the way down toward the Dixon entrance. across the interior. Holes of VFR should be expected across the middle and upper Yukon Valley. IFR conditions across the north coast there with a little bit of VFR on the north side of the Brooks Range summits. As we get into Thursday, that should expand a little bit more into the afternoon. You'll notice the IFR moves north of the coast. IFR stays in place, though, across the Bering Sea and most of the west coast from about the Kuskokwim Delta and just south into the southwestern Capes, all the way into the Bering Strait region and in the outer sections of Northern Sound, covering up all of St. Lawrence Island, St. Paul, St. George, and into the central and eastern Aleutians. We'll see IFR lingering out over the Gulf and maybe pushing into the Barrens, perhaps just close or just outside of Kodiak Island, or Kodiak City, I should say. Most regions in Cook Inlet and for most of Kodiak Island and Bristol Bay at least will be under MVFR tomorrow afternoon and along the outer coast of southeast, with a little bit of reprieve for southeast to fly around with VFR for Thursday afternoon. The same goes for most of the Yukon Valley all the way up to Arctic Village, Fort Yukon, and the Copper River Valley. As you get into Friday morning, even more improvement across the interior, the north slope into southwest. Still some patchy MVFR there just south of Bethel. Areas around the Yukon Kuskokwim looking at IFR into the Bering Strait. Also in the northern end of Kotzebue Sound, though places like Shishmaref may sneak out with MVFR to start the day. St. Matthew, St. Paul, St. George, all the way out toward Adak, Atka, looking at IFR conditions there, as well as the Pacific coastline of the Alaska Peninsula down toward Sandpoint and west. MVFR lurking in the Gulf, but southeast, south central, and the Copper River Valley, all looking to be VFR for Friday morning. You'll see a little bit of MVFR sneaking back into the Dixon entrance, Ketchikan, Annette, probably Hyder looking at MVFR conditions there north through the capital city, VFR. The Copper River Valley, most of the Yukon, really the upper Kuskokwim, looking at generally VFR conditions, but MVFR moves back in to most of our southwest coastal villages, as well as IFR into places like Macoriak and right along the Yukon Delta, and into parts of the Bristol Bay Capes, Togiak, parts of Unalaska, Nikolsky. You're looking at IFR for Friday afternoon. The North Slope looks pretty good for the Beaufort. As you get into the Chukchi Coast, you're going to be looking at a little more IFR there and into the western sections of the Capes, as well as the Bering Strait. Here's a look at the pass conditions now in detail for your daytime tomorrow. If you're flying through Anaktuvuk or Adigan Pass, you will start out with IFR, expecting that to improve a little bit toward marginal conditions as you go through your Thursday. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass expecting to be MVFR all the way around into Rainy Pass, holding that level for most of the day. Some improvement maybe if you can get through Windy Pass, looking at VFR by the afternoon. Isabel Pass should also be looking for some minor improvement throughout the day. Mentasta Pass starts out at marginal levels there with some improvement as we go into the afternoon. Tanita Pass, we expect to see marginal conditions there probably for most of the morning, and then VFR by the afternoon hours there. Portage Pass starts a little bit worse at IFR and then maybe some minor improvement toward marginal. And Chilkoot and White Pass, marginal conditions there onward into VFR. As you look at freezing levels now, you'll notice that once again we don't have a huge intrusion of cold air. Levels are as low as 6,000 feet across the west and northern mainland there. You can see a little bit of a cooler area there around the Gulf of Anadyr, around 4,000 feet and below, but most areas are probably around 5 to as much as 10,000 feet across southern parts of southeast. The surface freezing line retreating a little bit toward the Canadian coastline. Icing potential then is way up there, above 9 to maybe 10,000 feet across the north and western parts of Alaska, isolated moderate at best right now. Today's levels are very similar, so we're not expecting a huge change. The main focus of that will be across west and northwestern Alaska all the way down through the central Aleutians. The jet stream right now showing low pressure across the Chukchi with a trough digging out across the Bering in the North Pacific and kind of keeping a large part of the mainland in the doldrums here, but we have a broad southerly flow across the west coast, 20 to 25 knots. High pressure is weak over the northern Gulf and low pressure just south of that. And that's keeping steering winds fairly light from the south across southeast, from the south across most of the western Alaska. And again, winds are generally fairly light in the region with low pressure sitting just to the south and west of the Pribilofs and our wide and slow-moving trough just kind of sitting in place there across the west. Here's a look at turbulence. And because of that strong southerly flow, we're looking at considerable moderate, mainly across the Noatak and Kobuk valleys all the way down into the southwestern Capes, the Alaska Peninsula, and the central and eastern Aleutians below 3,000 to 4,000 feet.
On March 11, 2011, a 9.0 magnitude earthquake off the Pacific coast of Japan generated a tsunami. This series of ocean waves sped towards the island nation, with waves reaching 24 feet high. The result? was devastation and utter destruction. Towns were engulfed by water and swept away. Farmland was flooded. Tens of thousands of lives were lost. The National Police Agency reported damages to hundreds of roads, bridges, and more than 100,000 buildings. The surging water flooded rivers and destroyed harbors. In some areas along the coast, tsunami waves reached 6 miles inland. Tsunamis not only cause severe damage when they first strike land, but also as the water recedes back to sea. Tsunamis can inflict this type of damage because of some unique features. As tsunami waves travel across ocean basins, they may be as little as a few centimeters high, but they extend down to the ocean floor. This is different than traditional waves, which are only surface features. Tsunamis can also travel hundreds of miles per hour in the open ocean. As these waves approach a coast, the shallowing ocean floor slows the waves down and pushes the water mass upwards. The quicker the ocean floor transitions from deep to shallow, the greater potential for a higher wave height. So, tsunamis that experience this sudden shift into shallow water can have the height and momentum to pack a serious punch. Unfortunately, Japan found itself in this scenario. This image shows how abruptly the Japanese islands rise out of the ocean. Other coastal areas in the region have much more gradual slopes. The earthquake on March 11th was the most powerful known to hit Japan, and the tsunami it created had the necessary ingredients to make it such a deadly and destructive force. "80 miles east of Japan, a 9.0 magnitude earthquake rocks the ocean floor. This disturbance causes a transfer of energy from the seafloor to the ocean, generating a series of ocean waves, known as a tsunami. In about 20 minutes, waves strike the Japanese coastline. Other nations go on high alert because the tsunami will propagate or spread throughout the Pacific Ocean. As the tsunami radiates outward from Japan, it encounters a variety of ocean features, such as ridges and underwater volcanoes, which guide the tsunami and create a complex pattern of scattering and reflective waves. In 8 hours, the waves reach the Hawaiian Islands, and in 9.5 hours, they hit the west coast of the United States. In 16 hours, the tsunami reaches the Indian Ocean and New Zealand, and by 22 hours, the entire Pacific Ocean had been affected. The impact of a tsunami can be highly variable because of the complicated interactions with ocean features and coastline elements. Wave height and speed will differ from place to place. Since tsunamis can be hundreds of miles long and travel thousands of miles away from where they originated, they are considered a worldwide threat when they form. These are the sounds of a tsunami warning. They alert residents that a killer wave is about to strike. These sirens, however, are just a small part of the sophisticated warning systems that played a role in Japan and in the US during the Pacific Ocean tsunami in March 2011. Most tsunamis are generated by an undersea earthquake. Fortunately, Japan has one of the most advanced earthquake early warning systems in the world. It detects tremors, calculates the epicenter, and sends out warnings from over 1,000 seismographs scattered throughout the country. The Japan Meteorological Agency issues the warnings and sends alerts to television and radio channels, the internet, and mobile phone networks. When the earthquake struck 80 miles offshore, warnings were generated in about 3 seconds. The tsunami warnings came 3 minutes later. These take longer because more complex calculations are involved and must factor in ocean data. Since the first tsunami wave struck the coastline within 20 minutes, the advanced warning provided some residents with crucial minutes to reach a safe area. While the earthquake sent powerful tsunami waves westward toward Japan, the tsunami also propagated east into the Pacific Ocean. Here, warnings are issued by the Pacific Tsunami Warning Center, operated by NOAA in Hawaii. NOAA maintains a large network of buoys with ocean floor sensors that are strategically positioned in the earthquake-prone zones of the Pacific. This system collects vital ocean data for tsunami forecasting. On March 11th, only 25 minutes after the earthquake struck, the first buoy station measured the tsunami and relayed information to Hawaii. Scientists used this data to run models and issue forecasts and warnings to nations throughout the Pacific. From there, local emergency managers decided what actions were appropriate to take for public safety. The earthquake and resulting tsunami devastated the Japanese coastline, causing damage that will take years to repair. While we can't prevent these forces of nature from happening, our early warning systems can help us prepare for the dangers headed our way.
And now, marine weather around Alaska. And back with your marine weather now. Of course, the biggest news with the sea ice update is that it remains well off the Alaska coastline there. By our estimates, north of Utqiagvik, it's about 300 to 350 nautical miles north of the coastline there, and a little bit closer around Kaktovik, perhaps about 275 to 300 nautical miles. But by and large, there is a lot of open water right now north of Alaska's coastline. In the coming week or so, you'll be getting the availability to see the seasonal outlook from the Alaska Sea Ice Program, so stand by for that. As soon as that is released, we will let you know. You can check out the very latest seasonal information there from the Alaska Sea Ice Program. In the meantime, winds will be light and seas will be small for the most part around southeastern Alaska as we go into tonight and tomorrow. Probably starting off the day with some fog in the same old places you saw it the last couple mornings there, including around Yakutat and Gustavus, Petersburg. So watch for that. A little bit of slow travel perhaps to get started, but it should burn off and looks like a pretty nice day tomorrow. Light northerlies on the inside passage, light offshore winds for Thursday afternoon across the outer coast, 5 to 10 knots there with 4 to 5 foot seas. By Friday, a little bit more of a northerly push coming down the eastern Gulf Coast. Northeasterlies coming out of Sitka all the way down toward Craig. Easterly flow at 15 with 6 foot seas there outside of the Dixon entrance. Still looking at light winds and small seas on the inside for your Friday. For South Central, a gentle southerly breeze across Prince William Sound, 10 knots, 2 foot seas there, 3 foot seas on the outside. A little bit of a stronger southeasterly flow across the Western Barrens, 20 knots, 3 foot seas, one of the stronger spots there on the entire map this time. 10 knots up Cook Inlet, around 1 to 2 foot seas are expected on Thursday. Not a whole lot of a change on Friday, a little bit more of a northwesterly shift as high pressure pushes eastward and low pressure out west gets a little bit closer. We'll start to see a little change in that wind direction as we get into Friday. Still looking at some stronger south and easterly winds outside of Kamishak and Kashamak Bay over the western Barren Islands as well. Around Bristol Bay, look for a southeasterly flow, 25 knots, 6 foot seas there. Notice the gusts coming up there north of Cold Bay. Across the Bering Sea coastline, gust of 45 on Thursday with a 7 foot sea. Southerlies also picking up from Shelikof Strait all the way down towards False Pass and out around Akutan and then into the eastern Aleutians. More on that in a minute. 10 to 30 knot winds there across the western Gulf and into the Alaska Peninsula on Thursday. You can see that shifting eastward a little bit more as that boundary is moving closer to Bristol Bay and Kodiak Island for Friday. 30 to 35 knots, just about all areas except around Kodiak Island. You're looking at 3 to 4 foot seas there. And as much as 7 to 8 foot seas across the Bering, 9 to 14 foot seas there in the vicinity of Sand Point to Chignik there on Friday afternoon. For the Aleutians, again, a southerly wind comes up from Nikolsky to Unalaska, 20 to 35 knot winds there on Thursday, 7 to 12 foot seas expected, 6 to 8 foot seas on the north side, and northerly winds wrapping into the backside of this low. Not a terribly strong one, but enough to bring up the winds a little for a few moments anyway. 5 to 6 foot seas across the central chain of the Bering and 7 to 8 foot seas out west. As we get into your Friday, that's shifting even further off to the east, so winds start to go down again, 15 to 20 knots, anywhere from 6 to 9 foot seas across the eastern chain. And we pick up our southerlies again, feeding into the next weather system as it approaches for Friday night and Saturday. South wind 30 knots and 5 foot seas from Kiska to Shemya. Compare that to 15 knots around Unalaska to Nikolsky with 4 foot seas on Friday. Across the west coast, a south and easterly flow blowing off of Hooper Bay and Macoriac, 20 knots there with 5 to 6 foot seas. Southerlies coming into the Kuskokwim Delta and the Yukon Delta. 30 knots and 9 foot seas there, a little bit of a stronger flow just south of Togiak. Southerlies continue for St. Paul and St. George, only looking at 7 foot seas for Thursday. That shifts to a northwesterly flow coming off of St. Matthew through the Pribilofs on Friday. 20 knots tops around St. Matthew with a 5 foot sea. Southeasterlies blowing across Norton Sound and St. Lawrence Island are expected 25 knots there with 5 to 6 foot seas in the region by Friday. For the North Slope communities, look for a northwesterly flow to be light around Kaktovik, but west of that, Prudhoe Bay, Utqiagvik, all the way to the Chukchi coast, a south and easterly flow 15 to 25, looking for 4 to 7 foot seas on Thursday. And a south wind develops a little bit of a stronger note there around Point Lay to Cape Lisburn, Point Hope, Kotzebue Sound, anywhere from 10 to 20 knots, 3 to 4 foot seas, south and easterly flow across the Beaufort, 15 knots and 3 to 4 foot seas for you as we go into your Friday afternoon. Recapping tonight's weather, high pressure still in charge of the Gulf at 1,022 millibars. A generally clear sky will result in cooling things down enough so that fog could form across southeastern Alaska up toward Yakutat and into parts of Prince William Sound, maybe outside of the Gulf Coast. As we get into the Bering, you see a 1,002 millibar low. That will be our main weather feature as we go from tonight and into the rest of the week. It'll kind of fall apart a little bit on Thursday and then reorganize into a stronger weather system on Friday, bringing a chance for some persistent south winds and periods of moderate to occasionally heavy rain, certainly turbulence, low ceilings and visibility, and periods of showers across southeast. Thanks for watching tonight. See you tomorrow.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.